So first talking about why diversity. Um, One reason is that people of color are usually the hardest hit by climate disasters, whether it's floods or wildfires or hurricanes. People of color already tend to live in places that have low air quality or live in urban areas that have high heat or on floodplains. So when these climate disasters happen, they are usually the first and the hardest hit. We also know that people of color are the growing percentage of the population in the United States. Currently, people of color are about 40% of the US population and whites are about 60%. And by 2045, people of color are projected to be more than 50% of the population. So POC voters are increasingly determining the outcomes of elections. For any issue to really make it to the mainstream and be important, we really need their support. Lots of research has shown that people of color support climate action more than whites. So in this survey, 2019 by the Yale Program on Climate Communication, we see here that Hispanics, Latinos, and Blacks are alarmed and concerned a lot more than whites on climate change. And they have lower levels of denial, doubt on this issue. People of color also support climate action more than whites. So in this chart, Hispanics, Latinos, and Blacks reported that they are either participating in a campaign on climate change now, or I would definitely do it. And they said this in greater rates than whites. So it's a huge opportunity for the climate movement, where engaging these voters can have a huge impact on our issue. So how are we doing at CCL? This chart shows how the rate at which people of color have joined the organization since 2014. So each year, generally, more people of color are joining CCL, bringing the age gap the race gap a little closer, but we're far away from the national average. So the total at this point is that we have about 13% people of color and 87% white at CCL. Diversity is one of CCL's core values. It reads, "We empower everyone in exercising their personal and political power, regardless of race, ethnicity, nationality, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, religion, ability, or political affiliation, also socioeconomic status. We seek out, support, and elevate people whose voices may not have been fully heard." So it's so core to CCL that we want to welcome everyone who cares about this issue to do something on climate change and to join us in creating change. And it doesn't matter who they are, what their background is. All right, so now I'm going to show you this video from Nathaniel Smith. He talked to us at the June conference, and I think that this is such a really moving clip. When he gave this talk to us at the June conference, it was right after the murder of George Floyd, and things racially were really erupting in the country. So he offers some thoughts about that. Nathaniel Smith serves as founder and chief equity officer of the Partnership for Southern Equity, which advances policies and institutional actions that promote racial equity and shared prosperity for all in the growth of metropolitan Atlanta and the American South. Okay, so a little bit of switching here. We also need to do share computer sound.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I don't believe that it is by happenstance that I am speaking to the Citizens Climate Lobby today. I am sure that you all have leveraged this opportunity to come together in many great ways to think about how this illustrious organization and its members can begin the process of working to protect our planet, to advance policies that will, of course, lower carbon and and all of the other ways that we measure the disparate impacts of our consumption on the planet. And I want to take the time to definitely commend you all for that deep commitment that you have to our planet and to our environment. I would just ask, though, for you to consider one thing. Could we have a truly sustainable society if that society is not just? Can we continue to work as environmentalists or champions for sustainability if we continue to see our fellow human beings continuously oppressed by a system that is connected to the extreme extraction that our planet experiences on a day-to-day basis because of greed and because of consumerism and because of violence? Now, some people on this call may think that I am elevating a partisan conversation, that it is about a D or an R or a C or L, but no. This proposition, it has nothing to do with politics. And what it has to do more than anything with is love or fear of growth versus death, of extraction versus resilience. And we must begin the process of beginning to bring the two together. Our environmental movement, the movement that has grown incredibly for the past 50 years, cannot afford to be silent anymore when the majority of African Americans and communities of color live by places of pollution, when over 50% of African Americans compared to whites live near heat islands. We cannot afford to show up and say that it was horrible that George Floyd died by having a knee on his neck, when communities of color in urban areas continuously have knees on their neck as a result of bad air quality, when communities of color in rural areas continue to have knees on their neck because of them residing in places of high pollution. We cannot afford to be silent anymore. We have to begin to be courageous enough to understand and begin to make the correlation and the connection between the extreme extraction, the greed that we experience that has continuously hurt our planet and forced us to continuously use fossil fuels to drive our planet. And the correlation between that and the extreme extraction and greed that facilitated a situation where slaves were transported from Africa to America to work for free. There is a correlation and connection between the two, and we have to be willing to embrace that reality and that truth. So we cannot again afford to worry exclusively about our environment or exclusively worry about our planet without us also being committed to every manifestation of what the planet has helped to create in humanity. And we're now at a point, we're at a crossroads where we must stand up, we must speak out, we must begin the process of engaging around these critical issues that may feel uncomfortable. They may feel as if they are too big to undo and too heavy to hold up. But nothing is too heavy when you have people that are willing to hold those heavy challenges up with you. There's no issue or challenge that we can't face together. But we have to have the courage to own our history, a history, unfortunately, that has told a story of injustice, a story of violence, a story of marginalization, a story of injustice. And we have to take that story and the lessons that we've learned from that story and be willing to create a new world where all individuals are considered a part of our ecosystem of love and of renewal. That is the only way forward. And we can see on many occasions when we talk about the impacts of the environment, how they disproportionately affect communities of color. When certain segments of our communities get a cold as it relates to our environmental impacts, communities of color get pneumonia because of the structures and history of how certain systems of oppression policies have played a role in creating opportunities for some at the expense of others. Unfortunately, our history as it pertains to the environment is no different. And we see that on a consistent basis in communities that some of you may be uncomfortable driving through. But I would submit to you that in order for us to move forward to realize the type of changes that we want as it pertains to climate policy, if we want to create a healthier world, a world that is not suffering as a result of our extreme consumption and extraction, we're going to have to create a broader and bigger tent that is not just specifically focused on carbon emissions, is not specifically focused on nature or the polar bear, or policies that are focused exclusively on a carbon tax, without also understanding that in our communities, there has been a tax of structural racism that community. So my question is, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to continue to expect different results by doing the same thing? Are you really going to embrace this idea or belief that we will get to the type of successes that we want, the type of world that we want our loved ones to live in by leaving communities behind? Do we honestly believe that we have the political power and acumen to change public policy without the crowds that have been outside for the past few weeks that have been marching for justice? I would submit to you, no. And I would also submit to you that if there's something about this conversation that makes you feel uncomfortable, if there's something about this conversation that makes you feel as if this is not the right path, then I would encourage you to ask yourself why. Because we will not be able to move forward to create a more inclusive world if we're not willing to move forward together. So again, before I close, and I want to make sure that I also lift up the work of the Partnership for Southern Equity and the work that we do around climate justice and energy equity, where we have worked I'm here. So we work with our various partners of over 30 organizations to advance energy equity and climate justice policies. One of those approaches is engaging the Public Service Commission and working to ensure communities of color are engaged in things like the integrated resource plan or other key decisions. We just organized a national effort around shutoffs to ensure that vulnerable communities are not affected by COVID-19 in ways that will minimize their ability to come back. We also intervened with the development of Plant Vogtle, which is a nuclear power plant that Georgia Power has been working to expand and working with Early County and the communities that are around that, which are proportionally African American, to try to slow down the expansion of Plant Vogtle. Every other year, we have a conference called the Just Energy Summit, where over 300 and 400 or 400 leaders come from all over the country to talk about racial equity and climate and energy equity. We're working with the Atlanta University Center, which is the largest conglomerate of HBCUs in the country, to develop a solar grid and a solar strategy whereby the HBCUs can actually benefit from clean energy. All of this work is critical, and we just recently began an effort called Keep That Same Energy, where we're beginning to work with students at historically Black colleges and universities and other traditional schools to begin to organize a youth agenda around energy equity and climate justice. And last but certainly not least, you cannot expand the movement without expanding the ecosystem. And for us, we believe in that deeply. And so we have a leadership development program called the Just Energy Academy, where leaders from all over the Southeast come together and to learn about how to engage in key energy equity issues. So for us, it is critical. But we also understand that even though that part of the Partnership for Southern Equity is important, that it must be connected to other issues. We must learn how to connect the dots and be intersectional in the work that we do. The vulnerable communities that we care about don't have a jobs problem on Monday or a climate problem on Tuesday and an education problem on Wednesday or a health problem on Thursday. They have those problems every day. And if you are going to engage those communities, you have to be willing to meet those communities where they are. And so again, I invite you to become a deeper champion for racial equity, not just because the times are calling you to do it, but because it is one of the key pathways towards advancing an agenda that will realize a more clean and resilient and regenerative world. So I will stop there. Again, I appreciate and am always thankful for the opportunity to spend some time with the members of the Citizens Climate Lobby. I wish you well, and I look forward to seeing you all out there on the battlefield. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nathaniel. We appreciate taking time to come and address us today.
Okay, and we are going to go back into our presentation. Okay, you're all still hearing me? All right, yeah, moving forward together. So we can't do this work unless everyone is included and we are creating greater justice and climate equity for everyone. All right, so I'm going to give you some time now in breakout rooms. We're going to have 10 minutes where you can talk about the presentation we just heard and also have a chance to check in with each other. So you're going to be in pairs in breakout rooms of 2 and just practice some listening and empathy. Ask your partner, how are they doing? You know, what are your challenges? What are you grateful for at this time? And then switch to the other person. How are you doing? And do this with some empathy, deep listening, recreating the other person's experience, and reflecting what they say. All right, sounds good. So great, I'm glad you got a chance to check in with your buddy. Hope that felt good. So I think it's important for us to acknowledge how we are all doing at this time. And, you know, in our meetings, of course, we're all wanting to work on climate change and move the issue forward, but still to care about each other as human beings and support each other in other areas of our lives. So moving on, now we're going to talk about practices for inclusive chapters. I'm going to show you some information I got from this webpage on white supremacy culture. I think this is incredibly informative. Um, and white supremacy culture is probably a little bit limited of a title for this. So in the next few slides, I'm going to address this really as corporate culture. I feel like maybe that's um, a way that we're more used to thinking about it, because it certainly isn't just limited to white culture or even to Western culture. Um, a lot of this, we're so ingrained in these ideas that we don't even recognize that it can be done any differently. So these are some tenets, beliefs of corporate culture. So I'm going to read what it entails, and Jess is going to read the antidotes. So the first one is perfectionism. Little appreciation expressed among people for the work that others are doing. Appreciation that is expressed is usually directed to those who get most of the credit anyway. So in this category, we in corporate culture, we're seeing like that's where people are just expected to do what they do, and even if they do extra, they're not assigned much appreciation or credit, and credit goes to the people at the top.
So some ways that you can help combat this idea is develop a culture of appreciation. Develop a learning organization where it is expected that everyone will make mistakes and that those mistakes offer opportunities for further learning. You should create an environment where people can recognize that mistakes sometimes lead to positive results. This separates the person from the mistakes. When offering feedback, always speak to the things that went well before offering criticism. And finally, ask people to offer specific suggestions for how to do things differently when offering criticism.
Wonderful. Since we have so many, we can discuss each one for a long time, but I'm just going to keep moving ahead. Sense of urgency. Continued sense of urgency that makes it difficult to take time to be inclusive, encourage democratic and or thoughtful decision making, to think long term, to consider consequences frequently results in sacrificing potential allies for quick or highly visible results, sacrificing interests of communities of color in order to win victories for white people, seen as default or norm community. So here, if you can, one example might be like, instead of going through a transparent and inclusive hiring process, you're like, well, we don't have the time and resources or all of that, so we're just going to take this person who volunteered. So that's one way where like the sense of urgency can prevent us from going through the most inclusive process.
Yeah, so some ways to combat this sense of urgency are developing realistic work plans, having leadership which understands that things take longer than anyone expects, discussing and planning for what it means to set goals of inclusivity and diversity, particularly in terms of time, and learning from past experiences for how long things take, writing realistic funding proposals with realistic timeframes, and being clear about how you will make good decisions in an atmosphere of urgency.
Next is defensiveness. Criticism of those with power is viewed as threatening and inappropriate or rude. More effort is put into protecting those in power than facilitating improvement. I imagine a lot of us have experienced this in various work cultures.
Yeah, so it's important to understand that structure cannot in and of itself facilitate or prevent abuse. So you need to understand the link between defensiveness and fear. Fear of losing power, of losing face, losing comfort, or losing privilege. You should work on your own defensiveness and name defensiveness as a problem when it is one. Give people credit for being able to handle more than you think, and discuss the ways in which defensiveness or resistance to new ideas gets in the way of the mission.
Yeah, so part of combating the sensitiveness of this culture model is recognizing that learning and improvement is important, and receiving feedback, receiving criticism is an essential part of that, even to those at the top. Quantity over quality. All resources of organization are directed toward producing measurable goals. Things that can be measured are more highly valued than things that cannot. For example, numbers of people attending a meeting, newsletter circulation, money spent are valued more than quality of relationships, democratic decision-making, ability to constructively deal with conflict. Little or no value attached to process. If it can't be measured, it has no value, discomfort with emotions and feelings. So for example, diversity might become this issue of quantity over quality, where we're saying, how many people of color are in our meetings? How many people of color are in CCL? And just trying to drive up those numbers without really understanding what are the experiences of these people. Are we retaining people as well as recruiting them? What are people doing and saying about organization?
Yeah. So you should include process or quality goals in your planning, and make sure your organization has a value statement which expresses the way in which you want to do your work. And make sure that this is a living document and that people are using it in their day-to-day work. Look for ways to measure the process goals. So for example, if you have a goal of inclusivity, think about ways that you can measure whether or not you have achieved that goal. And learn to recognize those times when you need to get off the agenda in order to address people's underlying concerns.
Yeah, so sometimes the results cannot be measured, and yet those can be the most important things. Worship of the written word. Overemphasis on writing as the main mode of communication, overemphasis on jargon and technical language. Those with strong documentation and writing skills are more highly valued, even in organizations where ability to relate to others is key to the mission. So this is just recognizing that people communicate in different ways. And in other cultures, other ways of communication are more important. And with words especially, it's kind of like emphasizing the objective and the quantity over the quality. So where we are speaking with people and communicating in other ways that can convey a more personal touch and values that can't be conveyed by the written word.
Yeah, so take the time to analyze how people inside and outside of your organization get and share information. Figure out which things need to be written down and come up with alternative ways to document what is happening. Work to recognize the contributions and skills that every person brings to the organization. So for example, the ability to build relationships with those who are important to the organization's mission.
I should also mention language dominance is also a part of this. Like not everything has to be only in English. Only one right way. The belief there is only one right way to do things, and once people are introduced to the right way, they will see the light and adopt it. When they do not adopt or change, then something is wrong with them. The other, those not changing, not with us, those who know the right way.
Yeah, so accept that there are many ways to get to the same goal. Work on developing the ability to notice when people do things differently and how those different ways might improve your approach. Look for the tendency for a group or a person to keep pushing the same point over and over out of a belief that there is only one right way and then name it. When working with communities of a different culture than yours or your organizations, be clear that you have some learning to do about that community's way of doing things. And never assume that you or your organization knows what's best for the community in isolation from meaningful relationships with that community.
For paternalism, decision-making is clear to those with power and unclear to those without it. Those with power think they are capable of making decisions for and interest of those without power. Those with power often don't think it is important or necessary to understand the viewpoint or experience of those for whom they are making decisions. Those without power understand they do not have it and understand who does.
Yeah, so make sure that everybody knows and understands who makes what decisions in the organization. And make sure that everyone knows and understands their level of responsibility and authority in the organization. Include people who are affected by decisions in the decision-making process.
The last one is so important to what we're talking about. That like an organization doesn't function well if it's all decisions driven from the top and people feel like they don't have control over their work or over the policies that we're issuing. Individualism. Little experience or comfort working as a part of a team of people and organizations believe that they are responsible for solving problems alone. Accountability, if any, goes up and down, not sideways to peers or those the organization is set up to serve. Desire for individual recognition and credit leads to isolation.
So it's important to evaluate people based on their ability to delegate to others. Evaluate people based on their ability to work as part of a team to accomplish shared goals.
Right, that it's not about competing or who's getting the most merit, but that we're all working together towards a goal that benefits all of us. All right, progress is bigger, more. Progress in an organization is when an organization expands, adds staff, adds projects, or develops ability to serve more people, regardless of how well they're serving them. It gives no value, not even negative value, to its costs. As the budget grows, ways in which those we serve may be exploited, excluded, or underserved.
Yeah, so create seventh generation thinking by asking how the actions of the group now will affect people 7 generations from now. Make sure that any cost and benefit analysis includes all the costs, not just the financial ones. For example, the cost of morale, the cost of credibility, and the cost and the use of resources. Include process goals in your planning. For example, make sure that your goals speak to how you want to do your work, just not what you want to do, not just what you want to do. Ask those you work with and for to evaluate your performance regularly.
Thank you. Right. Objectivity, the belief that there is such a thing as being objective. The belief that emotions are inherently destructive, irrational, and should not play a role in decision-making or group process. Requiring people to think in a linear fashion, ignoring or invalidating those who think in other ways. So this is sometimes called being professional, right? Where like we don't share about our personal lives or our emotions in our work life. And obviously those are very important to us as human beings.
Yeah. So realize that everybody has a worldview and that everybody's worldview affects the way that they understand things. Realize this means that it applies to you too. And push yourself to sit with discomfort when people are expressing themselves in ways which you are not familiar with. Assume that everybody has a valid point and that your job is to understand what that point is.
Right, and okay, that's the last one. Right to comfort, the belief that those with power have a right to emotional and psychological comfort. Another aspect of valuing logic over emotion, scapegoating those who cause discomfort, equating individual acts of unfairness against white people with systemic racism, which daily targets people of color. So this is talked a lot about under this concept of white fragility, that our culture feels like white people are entitled to comfort, right? And they shouldn't be subjected to criticism or being told that what they're doing is perhaps racist, ahead of actually protecting people who are the victims of racism.
Yeah. So to illustrate this further, it's important to understand that discomfort is at the root of all growth and learning. Welcome it as much as you can and deepen your political analysis of racism and oppression so you have a strong understanding of how your personal experience and feelings fit into the larger picture. And don't take everything personally.
Great, thanks so much. All right, so I would like for us now to do breakout rooms of 3 and discuss in your breakout rooms which of these characteristics are at play in your work or in your life or in your CCL organizing. What can you and your organization do to shift practices that support inclusivity and racial justice? All right, so I'm going to talk for a little bit about what we can do to do inclusive outreach in our chapters on climate. All right, so and we usually start this with saying learning ourselves, right? And it can't be said enough that like no matter how much we know, there's still more to understand, to challenge ourselves with. So doing reading, talking with people about these issues, continuing to do that. So for racism and social justice, these 3 books are kind of the ones that I recommend the most. I think, there are many books out there, but these are the great ones to start with. White Fragility, How to Be an Anti-Racist, and The New Jim Crow. If you're interested in race and the environmental movement, these 3 books are solid and pioneers. Dorcetta Taylor's The Rise of the American Conservation Movement, Power, Privilege, and Environmental Protection. Carolyn Finney, Black Faces, White Spaces, Reimagining the Relationship of African Americans to the Great Outdoors. And Clean and White, A History of Environmental Racism in the United States. Very powerful, eye-opening books, and looking at how racism is ingrained in the environmental movement. You might want to start a discussion group with your CCL chapter. The Climate and Culture Action Team is a group in CCL that is doing this nationally. You may choose to check in with them to see how they're doing it. Princella Talley leads this group on one Wednesday evening each month. And their meetings, she says she starts with these agreements each time. So they say to each other, we leave our judgments at the door, we acknowledge our imperfect thinking and accept that we are here to educate before we react. We remain mindful and appreciative of all gender identities. We will not feel guilty about what we do not know. We will seek knowledge and remember there are no stupid questions. We agree to confidentiality when sharing our feelings in this space. We share actionable ideas and resources that provide value to others. And we know that we will make mistakes, but will continue to love one another as we work together to create a more livable world. So it's a great idea to start discussions on this very sensitive topic, with these agreements. You could start a committee in your chapter to think strategically about what can we do to welcome more people of color, young people, and other marginalized groups to our climate work. Yeah, so this is the sort of work that really benefits from diversity of minds and commit to implementing it and not just talking about ideas. So just a few ideas. For example, paying attention to where you are meeting. We're now all meeting online, so this is not as much of an issue. But for years, I had actually advocated that CCL groups meet more online, even when they can meet in person, because it is more accessible. And while there are so many values to meeting in person, not every meeting has to be in person, right? And meeting in person obviously creates a lot of challenges for people who have childcare or lack of transportation. If you are meeting together in person, or say we're doing a conference, offer meals, childcare, transportation for people who have barriers. Focus on community and mutual assistance. The meeting does not all have to be about work and the agenda, that we're also here together to show up for each other as a community and to provide assistance to those who need it. Create a buddy or mentor system. This is especially great for people who are new to your chapter, that they be paired up with someone who can show them around the ropes and be a friend and check in with them. Other ideas for bringing more people of color and marginalized groups to your groups. Invite presentations on climate and race, health, economy, equity. Invite speakers who are people of color. So to show that we care more about more than just about climate change. That climate change is integral to all these other issues that it intersects with issues that communities of color deeply care about. And I think if we provide more education and discussion on these topics, then more people will be interested in joining us and helping us with our solution. Invite young people especially, to a CCL regional conference or national conference. Provide funding for them to travel. And I think that's something that in our region we've done really a great job of. Groups being really generous to help bring young people to the conference. Creating paid internship opportunities to work with your chapter. Young people these days really need opportunities that they can put on their resume and to work with organizations. And even though it's a lot of work, it really benefits those young people, and it can also help us with our work. Get involved with a local environmental initiative led by POC organizations. So, are there groups working on water issues in your community, or the local landfill, or all these environmental problems in Michigan, right? Lend a hand to those organizations, and they will also be more likely to help us. Invite new people to your lobby meetings. That's a great place where we are empowering people to make their voice heard on climate change. So bringing more people to those meetings. Present to new groups. tailor your presentation to your audience. So like whenever I do presentations for young people, I tailor it to their interests, and for other groups, it's really important to do that too. Educate and dialogue with others. So like I already did some presentations this year where we really delved into this issue, and those recordings are available online. If you look at Antioch University, New England, Diversity Environment webinar series. This year we did presentations on the history and legacy of race and environment, the path to environmental justice is local, and when kids fight for environmental justice, wars have power. And of course, there are other organizations who are doing similar work, and we can learn from what they're offering and also create our own events. If you're wondering who you could invite, there are a couple resources out there where you can find speakers, consultants, board members who are people of color, and that might be interested in speaking or serving. Venues for outreach. So all kinds of venues, schools, churches, community organizations, cultural organizations, social justice organizations. If we cast a wide net, people of color are everywhere. And when you do that outreach, you want to really acknowledge the historical context. So learn about the legacy of racism in your community. I, for example, really enjoyed this book, Driving Detroit by George Galster. He really talks about how Detroit was shaped by racism and how it impacts us today, or like the Flint water crisis. So, there is a lot of racial distrust in pretty much every community in America. So I think acknowledging that, listening, focus on building trust before we ask people to do anything for us. And then when you're doing outreach, really think about what are you offering? It's not just about, hey, you guys come to our meetings, you guys learn what we do things our way, help us pass this bill. But what value are you offering to their community? So that might be the chance to be heard by elected officials. Like they can come and maybe not say whatever, but we're really empowering them to tell us their stories, right? And tell their elected officials their stories, their experiences about climate change, empowering their voice. We can offer leadership roles. We can offer internships and fellowships for young people. We can offer them an exceptional experience like the DC conference and cover their costs to go there. Provide them with funding, community, and compassion. The Third Coast did this last year where they reached out to middle school in Texas and worked to bring the students and their allies to the Third Coast Regional Conference. And they, of course, provided this exceptional experience, and they created programming at the conference so that these young people could connect with each other and learn things about climate change that are really relevant for their community. At CCL, we have affinity action teams where marginalized groups can find each other and connect with each other. So the Latinos Action Team was started in 2017. Climate and Culture for people interested in cultivating inclusion. The People of the Global Majority Caucus for anyone who identifies as a person of the global majority and not open to those who are not. The LGBTQA Action Team and also the Asian Pacific Action Team. We also recently launched the Indigenous Peoples Action Team. So these are great places to refer people to help them find their community in CCL. Become a community rep. So Karina Ramirez, our wonderful diversity outreach manager, she is coordinating this group where people who sign up to be community reps have meetings with her and meetings with the group where they're focused on learning, supporting, and practicing equity and inclusion at CCL. So these people are kind of like the seeds in their community to help expand diversity and inclusion throughout the country. Also, providing feedback for us. So, you know, if you see maybe it's a chapter leader or an RC acting questionably, tell us about it so we can address these things. Or like, you know, unfortunate things have happened at the conference, and they've talked to Madeline about it, and the way that she responded made those people feel like, wow, you know, like you actually listened to me, and I feel like the organization is paying attention to these issues. So you can do that for us at diversity@citizensclimatelabbie.org. Befriending the people of color in your life. So back in June, Brian Etling told me the story where he has this African-American neighbor, you know, who he was on friendly terms with, but like didn't know her very well. And he asked her, "How are you doing?" And she said that she was not doing very well, and you know, everything going on in the world and in the country was really distressing to her. So he was just very gently, you know, offer to talk to her about it, that if she wanted to have someone to talk to, that he would be there. They ended up having a 3-hour phone conversation about talking everything about race and religion, politics, history of America. So, you know, you can do that too with the people in your life. You know, maybe not somebody that you haven't talked to forever and just reaching out to them for this purpose, but really going with this authentic desire to get to know someone and have a conversation. All right, so it's 3:17, and we're going to do some great breakout groups again. This time I'd like you to talk about what can your group do to welcome more people of color, young people, and other marginalized groups? What can you do to help? What can you do in your own life? So Jess, will you be able to set this up?
Yep. So I'm about to open the rooms. Once again, it's going to be more like 5 to 6 people per room, so that we're able to make sure that everybody has somebody to talk to at any given point, despite technological difficulties. Okay, so here you go.
And we'll be back in 10 minutes.
And Clara, will we still have time for questions at the end?
Well, it'll be towards the end of our time. I mean, I think I can if people want to stay around for a bit.
Okay. Yeah, there was a specific question that was asked that I do not personally have a good answer to, and so I would like to forward to you because I feel like you would have a much more thoughtful and well-rounded answer. And also because, you know, this is something that you legitimately specialize in, whereas I still have so much to learn. So is it okay if I send you the question?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Deep question. All right, well, do you guys want to discuss the points in the last 20-minute segment?
Sorry, I was just reading questions in the chat. I didn't know what you
Okay, are there more?
No, it's more just like logistical things.
Okay.
I was trying to make sure I had answered for people. I've also just still been getting emails throughout this session of like people looking for links. So I'm just like constantly going back and forth between
Yeah.
chat and my.
Well, Deidre and Barbara, feel free to engage.
Um,
Okay,
I
so
a lot of the tips that you gave in terms of what can you do to welcome more people of color. One of the things that I was thinking, and you did address this in one of your slides, is the fact that, you know, organizations can put on fundraisers um, for groups of color or in marginalized or poor communities, because these individuals, you know, coupled with climate change, they have other pressing issues that they're dealing with, and climate change isn't always something that's on the immediate radar. So I feel that, you know, if you can go into if it was a good point to bring up fundraising, because if as an organization you can go into a community and help to support something or an issue that they're dealing with, that might encourage more people to, you know, get involved in the work that you're doing if you care about what they're doing.
Yeah, totally.
yeah, one of the
Steps
things
towards building trust and, you know, like offering something before you're asking.
yeah, one of the things that I was thinking about is that, you know, I did a lot in Oberlin to try to learn about the ways in which like systemic racism and oppression were affecting marginalized communities in the Cleveland area, and like specifically in the Oberlin area, when I was still living there full time as a college student. But I don't think I've done enough time to understand like how those things have played out in like my home community, because I don't think I was like emotionally mature enough or knew enough to even like try to consider those heavy topics. Like, well, at the time I was perceiving them as like really too heavy topics for me to even be thinking about as like a 16-year-old in my wealthy suburb where I was, you know, very comfortable. And so I think I definitely need to now go back and do that sort of analysis and reconstruction of like the dominant narrative that has pervaded my home suburb of Chicago. Since, you know, I think I fall into the trap of saying like, oh, well, this suburb is like predominantly like wealthy, upper middle class, like white people. But honestly, there are a lot of people of color staying in this community. And I think as somebody who is trying my best to learn more about these issues, it really is something that I need to do to find out who those people are and like how I, as somebody in this community who is, you know, trying to address these issues, can better support them and empower them and make sure that they're not continuing to become lost in the narrative of this suburb, if that makes sense. Sorry, that was like really long, winding answer.
I think that's a great point, Jess, because it's not only what you learn, but then what you will do with the information once you learn it. Although I am a person of color, but I intentionally took the step this year to teach a course at my university that within the African American and African American Studies discipline, um, regarding the issue of climate change, but it has a focus on African American communities. And in fact, Clara, one of the resources that you showed today, Carolyn Finney, my course is directly, that's actually the text that we're using for my course, and it's centered around a lot of the issues that she discusses in that book and some of the things and challenges that she has brings forward in that book that communities of color deal with, in addition to just, either their erasure or the assumption that they aren't necessarily connected to the environmental movement. And so that's a great resource. I really appreciated those resources. And also, like you said, there are many more. I know there's another book by Isabel Wilkerson, I'm not sure, but the book is called Cast, and I'm currently reading that book right now, and that's an excellent book when you talk about the historical, story of an education behind, systemic racism here in the U.S. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think I read her article in the New York Times. It's like a really long article, but like so great.
Yeah, she also has a TED talk. She also, but I think that one was more on migration, but it does have a link. So, yeah.
Yeah, and like Jess, like our communities are created to keep you in your bubble and not think about these issues.
Exactly.
Yeah, like where I live, I sort of live on the border between Detroit and Grosse Pointe. And in Grosse Pointe, it's like it just feels so different from Detroit. It's like so white and protected, and like because throughout this whole history, they've made it that way, like through discriminatory housing practices and like education and even like you can't go to their park if you are not a resident there, like just to keep people sequestered.
Well, I remember, the breakout rooms are about to close shortly, but I want to tell you about this experience that I had the next time that we taught Clara, because it's something that I'm sort of like still thinking about. But the breakout rooms will be closing shortly.
I think when we're back, we'll just ask people to offer their closing thoughts.
Right, well, we're seeing people slowly funnel back in. Breakout rooms still have a few seconds left, so we're still waiting for that massive wave of the rest of our participants. All right.
Yeah, Jess, would you be able to do a screen capture of us when we're all back?
Yeah. Yeah. So again, I hope you guys are okay with being on camera. Okay.
Okay, are we mostly back?
Yep, looks like everyone's back.
Right, great. So yeah, and an hour and a half is not enough time at all to have this discussion, but we have we have some spaces at CCLs dedicated to this. So if you go to the forum section of CCL community, you can find the diversity forum. Also, if you are interested in being a community rep or to give feedback, do it at diversity@citizensclimatelabbey.org. And we also have a Twitter account where you can interact with us. And we also have some contact info for all our various diversity coordinators. Okay, so now I'm going to stop share. And I know we're at the end of our time together, but if you're willing to stay on a little longer, we can have more of a all group discussion. So we'd just love to open it up to all of you who are still here. What are any revelations that you've had, some things that you'd be interested in trying in your own groups, or questions? So we'll just take some minutes for the whole group.
Clara, I do have a question. And maybe whoever was a part of this group might want to speak, since now if it's open to everyone, but it basically says that in this breakout group, they had a question about how, I'm assuming, to get paid internships. Is there a CCL document that they can be directed to? And I will personally say that I have benefited from not the internships per se, but I did receive funding to participate in a couple of the conferences, and they helped me out tremendously. So it was a good.
The easiest way is just go to community.citizensclimate.org and search internships. And we have one page that has like everything you need to know about how to set up an internship for your chapter.
I see Deb is raising their hand. So I'm gonna.
Thank you for using the raise hand feature.
Yeah. So I'm gonna unmute them so that they can ask their question.
Okay, yeah, that was my group that I was in, that we had asked about paid internships. So thank you for that answer. There were several people that felt like that was something that their chapter would really like to do.
Yeah, great. So
Clara, you're muted.
all right. So yeah, I was saying the only internships that are paid with CCL are the fellowships. And then for chapters that want to create their own paid internship opportunity, you have to raise the funds yourselves. And last year we actually did raise funds for 2 interns for the Great Lakes efforts to work with Elizabeth and John. So we got 2 interns who we paid to do work for CCL Great Lakes.
Yeah, Deb, you have another question?
Yes. What are the restrictions around doing a paid internship? Because we're not officially a nonprofit on our own, is there, do we have to be declared as an outside nonprofit to offer an internship on our own as a chapter of CCL?
No, you do not. Just however do you manage the finances for your chapter, you can do the same to administer the internship. So most groups, it sounds like I think the minimal is just like to have 2 people be on the bank account, and then you report every half a year or something, like how the funds are being spent.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Peter, you have a question?
Well, just a thought about internships and financing them. I'm wondering how many of us may have the opportunity to go to a local business and say, you know, they are interested in diversity as a part of their business model. ask if they would partner with us on supporting an intern as part of their program anyway.
That's a great idea.
Okay, good idea.
Anne? Yep. Oh, you have to unmute yourself.
Could you please put the link to that website, the website for the internship in the chat?
Yes. Give me just a moment and I'm happy to do that.
Yes, we'll work on that.
Great. Deirdre, did you have any questions that came your way?
I didn't have any additional questions at the moment.
Okay.
There was the question about the 7 generations concept.
Yes.
Given the cost of prediction modeling and the rapid advances are being made in science and climate-related matters, how can things be done such that the costs and changes are not prohibitive, but allow for rapid, proactive adaptation? Great. Yeah, I mean, obviously, we need to take action on climate change as quickly as possible. Some processes, if they take too long, then they can be quite costly and ineffective, and we need results. I think this is really to balance the overall sort of white supremacy culture, where it's like everything is all about like this needs to be done immediately. This needs to have results. Even something like the diversity strategic plan, right? The white supremacy culture approach is like, we need a strategic plan, and we need to put it out there so that people can see that we're doing something on diversity. But it takes a really long time to think about how we're actually going to do this, and how do you create a plan that's not just going to sit on a shelf or make a bunch of empty promises, but have buy-in, be doable, have funding. So we can't just do it in that way where we're emphasizing that urgency and the cost. So it's really needs to balance the results versus the process.
Great. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat. I'm going to change the security option so that you guys can unmute yourself if you have questions, or you can continue to use the raise hand feature. That makes it a little more easier to facilitate discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to put out to you as to what was something that stood out to you from what we learned today. What is something you'd like to try?
Peter, I see your hand raised.
You have good vision from that far away. I just wanted to put an idea on the table, because I think there's more than one way to skin a cat. And yes, we need to deal with diversity. We need to deal with inclusion. We need to deal with racism. But I'm not certain that labeling everybody or something racist immediately is the best way to solve the problem. The real problem is we need affordable housing. The real problem is we need houses where the utility bills won't kill low-income people. And I think if we deal with our local units of government to create the kind of programs that undergird anybody and everybody's life, that equity would be a matter of policy, not that it was something you had to decide who needed fairness first and then figure out how to help them. Could we just ingrain fairness in any and every policy? I think some of that can be done through local government. They have a lot of housing programs. They have utility programs, all those sorts of things. How do they spend that money? And does it undergird every single person in the community, regardless of whoever they may be? So could we work through regular policy in order to accomplish what we know we need to get done?
Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, racism certainly isn't just about what we say or how we feel about things, but the institutional uh, practices in our systems throughout society.
Yes, I think I agree with that, Clara. I don't think that it's the best idea to sort of, label individuals as, necessarily as you're a racist or whatever. But even with the issues that Peter brought up, I think it's important to look at the institution itself and see how racism has been ingrained within that system and how those types of issues can be rooted out, because it may be that you're a part of an institution that you don't have necessarily racist intentions, but if that system itself has been built on systemic racism, then, that's, I think you have to think about those types of issues before you can get to really addressing an issue about housing disparity and things like that. Because what happens is, I think the problem will just sort of repeat itself. So I like the way that you sort of pose that idea, and I think that is something important to think about. Like, everything doesn't have to be necessarily the individual, but we definitely should look at the system itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Deirdre. I think that was so well put.
Like Deirdre, for instance, I'd like to live in a community which has the policy that nobody will ever have their utilities shut off. I know that problem falls disproportionately on low-income persons and persons of color, but my community has a problem. People don't have a problem. And I think if we would say nobody will ever have the utilities shut off and figure out how to do that, we would give people the support they need. That's that after World War II kind of thing. How did most people build wealth? Well, the government helped us do it. I mean, my dad got a GI loan for the house. My dad went to college on the GI Bill. Government ushered him all the way into equity. And I think we need to understand in policy going forward, how do we do that for anybody and everybody?
Great. Well,
Absolutely.
thanks for those thoughts. Yeah. We're pretty much out of time.
Real quick, just I'm sorry, Holly and Deb have just had their hands up for a while, so just real quick.
Okay. Can we have someone who hasn't spoken go?
Holly has not.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would just, yeah, thank you. I'd like to appreciate what Deirdre said and also what Peter said, although I think what I valued about today so much is that where we have trouble thinking as white folks, especially, is we have trouble thinking about how racism affects us and affects our mind. And I really appreciated the attention on inclusion, because we just, I think we can easily connect what Peter, you were talking about is how today is related to that is like, who isn't at the table? Who needs to be at the table in order to do the kinds of policy that you're suggesting? And it often falls to our white inability to see that, and inability to be able to reach out and welcome and hand over some power. That it's kind of a combination of individual and group. So that said, I think what you did today in terms of format and allowing so much time for us talking with one another is just what's needed, because we need to get our thinking going. We need some prompts, and then, what can we do, what works? So I really appreciate the format that you gave and the questions that you gave us. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, and I encourage you to continue doing that in your chapters and on CCL community. There will also be a survey distributed to all the conference attendees, so please do give your feedback. All right, and we'll just finish here. Thank you all so much for coming. It's a great honor to present this subject and share together about this with you.